They said Precinct 18 was untouchable, a fortress where badges became licenses for brutality, where evidence vanished on command, and where even judges bowed to corrupt officers' demands. For 20 years, they had perfected their operation, every false arrest calculated, every bribe accounted for, every witness silenced. But then they arrested Eleanor Davis. She was a 78-year-old former teacher, an easy target, they thought. Just another elderly black woman to intimidate in their wealthy white neighborhood. 24 hours to process and forget. Instead, they gave her a front-row seat to their empire of corruption. Every conversation, every scheme, every crime laid bare before her. What they didn't know was that Eleanor Davis had spent a lifetime teaching her students to stand up against injustice. And now, with her son, the U.S. Attorney General, about to get a phone call, she was about to teach these officers the hardest lesson of their lives. Sometimes the most dangerous witness is the one you don't think is watching. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pristine aisles of Thompson's Market, an upscale grocery store nestled in the heart of Oakwood Heights. Eleanor adjusted her pearl necklace, an old retirement gift from her students, as she carefully examined the fresh produce. At 78, she still carried herself with the dignity that had commanded respect in her classroom for over 4 decades. The store's fluorescent lights gleamed off the polished floors, creating a sterile atmosphere that matched its carefully curated clientele. Eleanor noticed the sideways glances from other shoppers, but paid them no mind. She had lived in this city longer than most of them had been alive. 2 police officers, Brad Mitchell and Kyle Harris, stood near the entrance. Mitchell, stocky with close-cropped blonde hair and cold blue eyes, nudged his younger partner. "Look at her," he muttered. "She doesn't belong here." Harris, eager to prove himself, straightened his spine. "Want to check it out?" They approached Eleanor as she examined a bunch of organic bananas, their footsteps deliberately heavy against the tile floor. She looked up, her expression composed despite the sudden tension in her shoulders. "Ma'am," Mitchell said, his voice laced with forced politeness, "we've received complaints about suspicious activity in the store." Eleanor set the bananas down, moving with deliberate calm. "I'm simply shopping, officers. I've lived in this city for over 50 years, Harris scoffed. "And you often come to this particular store?" "I go where I please, young man," Eleanor replied, her teacher's voice emerging naturally. "This market carries specific ingredients I need for my Sunday dinner." Before she could say more, the store manager, Thomas Parker, a wiry man with nervous energy, stepped forward, siding immediately with the officers. "She's been wandering the aisles for nearly an hour," he claimed. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's false. I have my parking meter receipt to prove I've been here no more than 20 minutes. Mitchell stepped closer, invading her space. "Let's see some ID, ma'am." Eleanor reached into her purse, but before she could retrieve her wallet, Mitchell suddenly grabbed her arm. His grip was too strong for a woman her age, and she stumbled backward, crashing into a display of stacked oranges. They rolled across the floor as she tried to regain her balance. "Stop resisting," Mitchell barked. "I am not," Eleanor began, but Harris was already pulling her arms behind her back, locking handcuffs around her wrists. Near the checkout counter, a young black man named Jordan Carter had his phone out, recording everything. His hands shook with anger, but he kept the camera steady, documenting every moment. Mitchell noticed him and stormed toward him. "Delete that video, right now." Jordan stood his ground. "I know my rights." Mitchell twisted Jordan's arm until the phone dropped to the floor. He picked it up, tapped the screen, and shoved it back at him. "Delete it, or you'll be joining her downtown." Jordan hesitated, shoulders slumping in defeat. He deleted the file. Eleanor, still composed despite the humiliation, spoke firmly. "I want to speak to your supervisor." Mitchell laughed. "Lady, you're lucky if we don't add assaulting an officer to your charges." They marched her through the store, past wide-eyed cashiers and customers who suddenly found their shopping lists fascinating. Outside, the late afternoon sun had turned golden, the kind of beautiful day that usually brought people to their porches. But the sidewalks were mysteriously empty as the officers pushed Eleanor toward their squad car. She noticed something else. Their body cameras weren't on. "Your cameras aren't running," she observed. "Technical difficulties," Harass smirked, sharing a knowing look with his partner. The drive to Precinct 18 was slow, deliberate, designed to disorient. They took unnecessary detours, making what should have been a 15-minute trip stretch to nearly an hour. Eleanor sat silently in the back, memorizing every turn, every street name, every detail that might matter later. Inside the precinct, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across worn linoleum floors. The booking area smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Mitchell filled out his report, occasionally chuckling to himself as he exaggerated every detail. Subject became combative, attempted to strike officer, resisted arrest. Eleanor sat perfectly straight in the hard plastic chair, her wrists still bound behind her back. "Those are lies, and you know it." The desk sergeant barely glanced at her. "Book her. Chief Callahan wants the paperwork clean on this one." The name stuck in Eleanor's mind. Another piece of the puzzle. They pressed her fingers roughly against the scanner, took her photograph. Even in handcuffs, her head was high, her gaze steady. "I want my phone call," Eleanor demanded. Mitchell sneered. "Maybe tomorrow. Night shifts, short-staffed. You know how it is." The cell was cold, a bare metal bench bolted to the wall. Eleanor sat, back straight, mind sharp. She listened to the officers' footsteps, to their laughter as they discussed their weekend plans, to hushed conversations about cleaning up files before morning, and she took it all in. Through the small window of her cell, she watched officers carry files into a back room. She noted which officers whispered in corners, which ones glanced over their shoulders. In the early morning hours, she heard two officers discussing another arrest. "Just like we did with the old lady," one said. "Camera off. Clean report. Judge signs off. Case closed." Eleanor closed her eyes, not in despair, but in calculation. They had no idea who they were dealing with. No idea that, while they were doing their jobs as usual, she was doing hers, observing, analyzing, memorizing. They had underestimated her. That was their biggest mistake. As dawn began to creep through the high windows of Precinct 18, Eleanor Davis sat in her cell, already composing the testimony that would bring this entire operation crashing down. Because sometimes the most dangerous witness isn't the one yelling for justice. It's the one who's been quietly watching the entire time.